What is up, everybody? Thank you for joining the Sharp Angles podcast here on a Sunday. The Sunday, the after week one bloodbath Sunday that we're going to be talking about. This is our recap podcast. If you're listening to us on podcast, we actually do these live on Sunday evenings at 7:30 Eastern. So that's when we're recording. Actually, we still have a few games going on right now. The Chargers and Dolphins are still locked in the end of their game. So if you hear us talk about a few things and or we react to it, that's kind of what's going on. If you are listening to it through the podcast, you should come check us out on YouTube every Sunday evening at 7:30. Go to YouTube, search Warren Sharp, like the channel, subscribe to the channel, and you'll get notifications for when we go live. So make sure you go ahead and do that. But we're going to do this every week. We're going to come in, we're going to talk about the week that was, some of the most interesting games, some of the most interesting situations, talk about injuries, which unfortunately we had our fair share of those in week one, and then try to look forward, look at waiver wire for fantasy, looking forward, and just look forward in general at what we're paying attention to the next week. And I'm going to do that every week with a couple of my good friends. First off, we have Curtis Hirsch over here, Sharp Football Analysis, the waiver guru. How you doing, Curtis?
I'm doing good, but week one isn't quite over. The best team is yet to play later on tonight, so I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, we are recording before Curtis's beloved Cowboys play, and so his how he feels when this podcast is actually released onto the podcast feed might be a lot different than what it is now. I hope that's not the case for both he and I, because I have invested a lot in Tony Pollard, so that would be very good for Tony Pollard to have a big game. Also going to be joined by our injury guru, writes the IR tracker, the injury report over at Sharp Football Analysis, does a great job with that. Tucker Bagley, how are you doing, Tucker?
I'm good. As me and Curtis talked about before the show, I'm prepping for a busy week. There have been a lot of big names who are unable to finish this week's action. So already, I mean, I know personally for my fantasy team, I'm down like 3 players in my starting lineup already, and it's been 1 week. So it's been a brutal day so far, but we love it, right? That's why we're here.
It is why we're here. It does seem every year. Those of you who know me, have followed me for a little while, know that I used to work for Roto World and wrote the Roto World news feed. And it seemed like these first 4 weeks, for whatever reason, are just the heaviest with injuries. And then we kind of settle into a groove and it kind of gets fine. Do you notice that too, Tucker?
Yeah, and it's funny. Like when I was going through the opening week injury reports last week, I thought, man, it's a pretty light week. Like this is easy work. There aren't a lot of big names, and then we had a couple bombs drop on Saturday and early Sunday morning that made me think, wow, maybe not. And then today, I mean, we're gonna go through all the big names that were lost to injury today. And you're right. Like I think September, I don't know if it's coming off a training camp or just getting back into the swing of things, and you end up with a lot of soft tissue injuries. But yeah, early on, I mean, it's looking like this season, a lot of people are going to be hitting the waiver wire hard early this week because you might be out 2 or 3 starters.
Well, if you had read the waiver article over at Sharp Football Analysis last week, you probably would have already picked up Puka. I always mess it up. Nasua? Did I get it? I'm not sure. Either way, Puka. We're going to call him Puka. You would have picked up Puka. You already picked up Kyron Williams because Curtis wrote about them last week, and they're coming off a big game. The Rams beat the Seahawks, which I did not expect at all. The Seahawks had 3 total yards in the second half. The Raiders won a close game. The Packers aren't dead. The Bengals might be their offense, like it might be dead. The Bucks aren't terrible. The Steelers might be. It was just a really, really wild week, an absolutely wild week. So is there anything from this week that just really stood out to you when you were looking at, okay, this is just really something I didn't expect? Because for me, candidly, I still think the Rams are bad. I still think the Rams are going to be one of the worst teams in the league. They played the Seahawks tough last year, even after Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp were gone. That could just be one of those things where they're going to always play that team tough. I just still think they're not that good. I still think they don't have any talent, but for them to come out and do what they did to the Seahawks is just wild. So anything like that, anything that just really, really shocked you coming out of week one?
I'm going to go the opposite. I'm going to go the 2 teams that got steamed the most in preseason. Their offenses were the Commanders and the Steelers, and they were dreadful today. The Commanders had the Cardinals defense, and they barely got a win there. And then the Steelers, I'm not even sure what went on over there. But those are two teams that got hyped because they had such good preseason. Now the Commanders are off to Denver, Mile High, week 2, and then they got Buffalo and Philly to follow. So the rough couple weeks for that offense. Sometimes you can't. What happens in the preseason, you thought the entire off season, and let it change your process that much. So I'm going to go with the not surprises here.
Yeah, and I fell victim to that. I bought in on Kenny Pickett. We'll talk about the Steelers here in a bit. I bought in on Kenny Pickett, and yeah, it did not go well. What about you, Tucker?
Yeah, I just was shocked at, I mean, maybe not shocked, but just the amount of sloppy play, the amount of turnovers, how defenses really seem to be 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of offenses, especially in the early window. I think the 1:00 games, only like 1 or 2 games went over 40 total points. There are a lot of turnovers, a lot of just, not really good offensive play across the NFL. And I think part of that's because no one really plays in the preseason. Continuity, it's not really a thing. A lot of new quarterbacks and a lot of new places for a week where I think everyone was hyped up, excited for football. And, this Chargers Dolphins game really lived up to the hype. But for the most part, a lot of teams look to be still spinning their tires and really struggling to find their stride. And a lot of teams, like Curtis mentioned, that we were excited about watching, and teams that have Super Bowl aspirations, like the Bills, like the Chiefs, or not the Bills, like the Bengals, rather, didn't necessarily show us the best of what they have to offer. And I think that was certainly surprising a little bit, considering the draws they had week 1, which I thought were, somewhat favorable.
Yeah, like the Bengals, like you would think going up against the Jim Schwartz defense and the changes that the Browns are making to their defense, that actually fits in really well with where Burrow has found success, and they just didn't find any of it at all. And so, yeah, it was surprising to come out and see that. But like you said, it's week 1. Like, we'll talk about this. I have some results from last week 1 that I want to reel off here at the end of the show as we're looking forward. It's important not to overreact to some of these. It's going to be a long season. We'll kind of see where it goes. But yeah, it was just an absolutely wild week. By the way, the game, the Miami Chargers game, or the Dolphins Chargers game is over. Miami goes in and gets that win. So there you go. I'm going to stop darting my eyes over here to my left now that one is finished. So let's get into it. Let's start with injuries. You mentioned sloppy play. One of the places we saw sloppy play was in the Ravens and Texans game. I think the Ravens had 13 penalties in that game. Like, it was just absolutely sloppy play. And unfortunately, what we also saw in that game were some injuries. We saw J.K. Dobbins go down, which is just awful given, everything he's been through already in his career. They've already announced it as a torn Achilles. He's gone. We saw Ronnie Stanley go. I actually did not see that injury, but it seems like he's going for an MRI. Tucker, do you have anything more on that Ronnie Stanley injury and what it's going to be?
Yeah, I don't have an update on it, but it is worrisome because he's not the only Ravens offensive lineman that went out. Tyler Linderbaum, the center, went out as well. And that's just the top of the tip of the iceberg for Baltimore, who lost J.K. Dobbins for the season, Marcus Williams. He tore his pectoral muscle. He's going to miss quite a bit of time this year. And for a team in Baltimore whose seasons the last couple of years have really been derailed by injury, namely Lamar Jackson, who thankfully, I guess, is healthy coming out of week 1. So that's one silver lining you could say in Baltimore. It's a rough start to be this shorthanded coming out of week 1 with 3 or 4 of your guys that you've been counting on to make a difference this year. That's a tough draw for them.
Especially, we think the Bengals will probably bounce back. The Steelers didn't look great, but it seems like the Browns are pretty good. We'll talk about them. I don't think Watson played particularly good today, but they seem like their roster is as good as we think it is. The Ravens, to have those injuries in this division, it's going to be a tough road. But speaking specifically about J.K. Dobbins, what we need to do now from a fantasy perspective is look forward. He is out for the season. We need to think about, okay, what is the waiver wire going to be? Who are we picking up? How much are we spending? And unfortunately, I don't think we probably have all the information on this backfield at this point, Curtis, because I imagine we're going to see Kareem Hunt or Leonard Fournette. Do you think so as well?
I have to imagine. The Ravens last year, they kept bringing in old dusty guys they're not super satisfied with Gus Edwards as being the main guy. I think we've learned in the past. So I think Leonard Fournette and Kareem Hunt, probably more Fournette, did the right thing by not signing anywhere, waiting for an opportunity like this. But one thing I do want to shout out is fans, don't ever get mad at a player for holding out because he wants a contract extension. Look at this Dobbins situation. Like that's terrible. This young man has now had 2 horrible injuries, and who knows if he's going to get another contract. And he was holding in, I'm sure, at the beginning of the year. Didn't get his contract, and now look. So don't ever be upset for your players on your favorite team looking out for their best interest, because that's horrible. But yeah, I would imagine they are going to scour the free agency here in the next couple of days to fix that up. But if not, Justice Hill looked okay. Gus Edwards is probably not a guy you're ever going to hand the ball off to 20 times a game. He's kind of a bruising back. So we'll see what happens there, but something interesting to look forward to.
You mentioned it is interesting that they've not ever really just devoted themselves to Gus Edwards, because Gus Edwards, last year he was also coming back from an injury. But Gus Edwards has been an efficient running back throughout his career. Like if you go and look, I don't have his numbers off the top of my head. I believe he averages like 5 yards per carry almost every season. Like he's an efficient back. And Leonard Fournette was not that last year. Now it was a different situation. We saw that Rachaad White wasn't either, so it could have been situation. But so if you're bringing in Leonard Fournette and you have a back there in Gus Edwards, Gus Edwards is not going to contribute in the passing game in the same way, but he's been efficient his entire career. That doesn't make a ton of sense to me. You mentioned Hill. Hill did get the 2 touchdowns, but he didn't do a lot on any of his other work. But Hill has had some moments for sure. I do think they bring in a veteran. I think that this team recognizes the situation they're in. The rest, and like that's the thing, is they had 13 penalties, but if you take those 13 penalties out of it, the rest of the offense, you were kind of excited about what was happening even without Mark Andrews. You were especially excited by Zay Flowers and what you saw out of Zay Flowers, albeit against the Texans. The defense, it was against CJ Stroud, but the defense played well, got pressure, forced mistakes. And so this is a team that needs to win now. This is, even with the injuries, this is still a pretty good roster. And I think that means that we're definitely going to see a veteran. Did y'all get to watch any of the Zay Flowers usage? Did you get to see anything from that?
That's the game I keyed on this afternoon. And yeah, I think that is the offense. That's going to be their play. Just quick hitters to him, especially if there is any extensive injuries to the offensive line and Lamar has to get the ball out quick. That he's dynamic. He's fun to watch. So I think get your bets in for Offensive Rookie of the Year if you can still get that in.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he had 10 targets in the passing game, 9 catches, which were by far the most. I don't think anybody else on Baltimore had more than 3 targets in the passing game. He had a couple runs as well. It's clear that their offense is pretty much whatever Lamar could cook up, and if not, they're getting the ball in the hands of Zay Flowers and getting out of the way.
Let's move on to the Packers, the Packers are a team that I was pretty high on in the futures market, because I think people were just assuming that they would be bad. Now, all they did was beat the Bears today, but they beat the Bears pretty, soundly. And Jordan Love didn't even play well. One of the reasons they beat the Bears pretty soundly was Aaron Jones. And unfortunately, it seems like he went out with a hamstring injury near the end of the game. That happened pretty close to record time for us. So did you get any information? Have you seen anything, Tucker, about kind of what that was?
No, I mean, I imagine it's just a strained hamstring right now, which for a running back can be tough. That's something that can be re-injured quite often. So unless it's something incredibly minor and they just held him out because the game was pretty much in hand at that point, then maybe he could be back sooner rather than later. But if it's the kind of hamstring injury where he had to sit out no matter what, that's worrisome to me, because even though they do have AJ Dillon behind him on the depth chart, I don't know, one, how long it could be, but 2, this could be something that lingers for a while. And this could be something where he might be just in a state of flux on a week-to-week basis, where he might be limited in practice on Thursday and Friday in weeks 3, 4, and 5, and he just can't get up for game day. So this is an injury that I think, much like a lot of other, soft tissue injuries in the legs, it can be something that lingers for a while, and you're kind of in a gray area on a week-to-week basis where you don't know if he's going to be up or not based on what he does in practice.
I will say that I saw a picture of him after the injury being stretched out by a trainer on the sideline and like giving like staring into the camera like you would like pose for the picture. So that suggests to me that maybe it's not so serious. Maybe
Yeah,
it
and if
just
it's
was a
just a
game
cramp,
environment.
like they were up big at the time he got hurt. Like it wouldn't surprise me if when Matt LaFleur comes out to do his post game press conference or when he talks to the media tomorrow, when we tend to get a little bit more information. It wouldn't shock me if he just said it's a cramp. He'll be fine. He'll be back on the practice field on Wednesday.
I'm getting this from our great producer Sean. Sean said, a Packers beat reporter said he seemed okay coming off the field. That's via Rob Demovsky, who I believe still works for ESPN. I've lost track a little bit of my beat writers and where they all are. I don't follow the Twitter news feed as closely as I once did in a previous life. But it may have just been precautionary. That's a good sign. I will say, I mean, they need Aaron Jones, especially if we don't know what's going on with Christian Watson. He also has a hamstring injury. We don't know what that is. We saw the rookies get involved, but they don't really have that explosive ability. You mentioned AJ Dillon. At one point in the game, I don't know what he finished with because we're recording here right after. At one point in the game, he had like 9 carries for 9 yards.
Yeah.
They need
Finished with
the
13 for 19.
explosion of Aaron Jones. What did he finish with?
13 for 19. But he had 2
Curtis,
catches.
they need the
17.
explosion of Aaron Jones, right?
Aaron Jones. If Breed got banged up too, he took a hard hit, so I'm not sure if he's all right as well. So that they got all these rookies and they're getting pretty thin as well.
It's tough, and that's what you're going to worry about with this offense. Like I said, though, it's not even like the offense was amazing and they still took care of business against the Bears. And you kind of have to be worried about what that means, for the Bears. Are we going through when people got excited about the Bears? They added some, they added some talent to the offensive line. They added DJ Moore. It didn't click in week 1. Again, we're not going to overreact to week 1, but it's going to be interesting to watch. A team that we're going to try our best not to overreact to is the Pittsburgh Steelers, who got absolutely, from the opening gun, smashed by the San Francisco 49ers. Deontay Johnson went down in that game. It did not look good. He pulled up even before contact and immediately held his hamstring. That's not a good sign at this point in recording this. We don't know how long he's going to be out, but Tucker, it doesn't look good, does it?
No, that's the kind of hamstring injury where you aren't smiling on the sideline. That's something that I think is going to be a big issue for the Steelers team, who, I mean, they just got boat raced on Sunday, right? Like I thought that early week 1 or early 1 o'clock window, no team really separated themselves except San Francisco. Like San Francisco looked like they were playing a different sport than everybody else. They looked like they were playing a bunch of high schoolers out there. And for a team like Pittsburgh, who came in with sky high expectations, like Kenny Pickett, I think was 5 for 9 for 8 yards in the first half of the game, which is impressive in and of itself to average less than 1 yard an attempt with 5 completions. But yeah, I mean, that's a tough start for them because they came in with sky high expectations. Luckily for them, their counterparts in the division didn't necessarily separate themselves, right? Cincinnati, I think, despite today's result, is still the class of the division, and you're still tied with them. But yeah, that's a tough start for Pittsburgh. Now loses Deontay Johnson, and maybe that gets George Pickens more involved in this offense. Pat Freiermuth did have a touchdown, late in the game when it was already out of hand. But yeah, just a tough week and a tough start to a team that was really looking to build on last year's, kind of turn of good fortune at the end of the season.
What I will say about that Pickens is that it seems like their goal was to get him used more around, a full field receiver versus the kind of just go route receiver he was last year. He ran the highest percentage of go routes in the league among qualifying receivers last year. It seemed like they wanted to get him more involved, but he didn't actually lead the team in receiving. It was Allen Robinson, the ghost of Allen Robinson, came back and led the team in receiving. Most of that was in garbage time. I believe 53 yards of it was after Deontay Johnson came out and so left. And so, we'll see what happens moving forward. They have Calvin Austin, obviously there. Calvin Austin brings some explosion, but it is one of those concerns. Deontay Johnson, do they have someone to fill that role? We saw Allen Robinson now 2 years in a row not be very good. If you're going to try to put him in a similar role to where they're using where they use Johnson, assuming this is a serious injury, again, we're assuming that here right after the games are over, it seemed like one. I mean, what are you doing, I guess, from a waiver perspective with this Steelers wide receiver situation, Curtis?
Staying away. Pat Freiermuth to the moon. I would say if as long as he was okay, he got banged up as well. I don't
chest
trust
injury,
Canada to get Calvin Austin anything more than go routes. He's indeed, but is he going to draw up a game plan where he can be successful? I like the talent, but I just don't know if it's the coordinator to trust there. I want to shout out like Kyle Shanahan, Mike McDaniel. Looks like they're playing chess when the rest of the league is playing checkers, because both those two guys brought it today. Kudos to them. They absolutely.
Yeah, they absolutely, like, from the get-go, like I said, from the get-go, it was very clear that the 49ers were going to win this game. And like, you look at Pickett, and I bought in a little bit in the preseason, and you look at kind of what was happening to him. He was getting pressured a little bit. He was sacked 5 times. He had 2 interceptions, but the Steelers couldn't run the ball. Even before Deontay was gone, they couldn't throw the ball. They had like some spurts of success, but that was it. And so like the 49ers showed that defense is still there. It's still elite. And then on offense, that is where the, the real kind of special thing that you saw for the 49ers that makes you think, okay, especially with the Eagles kind of struggling against the Patriots, which I didn't expect, going up 16-0 and then kind of having to hold on to win. If Brock Purdy is going to look like what he looked like today, then the 49ers might need to be the favorite in the NFC, because last year what we saw from Purdy at the end of the season is if he got under pressure, it still wasn't good. He just wasn't pressured a lot. His pressure rate, his completion rate under pressure last year was 47.7%. 21.5% of his throws were inaccurate. I don't have those numbers, obviously, for this game because we're right after this game, but just from the eye test, it seemed like he was getting pressure. TJ Watt was getting after him, and it didn't matter. He was still able to run this offense. He was still able to get Brandon Ayuk, who looks like an absolute star. Please keep throwing the ball to Brandon Ayuk. Please, Kyle Shanahan, keep giving the ball to him. And I mean, like, this team looks like a juggernaut where I wasn't worried about it because this roster is one of the best in the league. They have a great defense. They have maybe the best group of weapons around Purdy. But I was like, okay, what are we going to see out of Purdy? Coming out of week 1, Tucker, I mean, they have a case. Are they the best team in the NFC, you know?
Yeah, it's funny. I was kind of watching all the pregame coverage this morning, and the thought came to me, he's only played 5 games. We've seen bad quarterbacks have good 5-game stretches. Maybe I'm not all the way sold on Brock Purdy, and I think he answered any question you would have had about him coming into today. I was really impressed. His ability, you're right, to stay calm under pressure. He was flushed out of the pocket a few times, was able to keep his eyes downfield and make plays outside of the pocket with his arm. He looked the part. He looked like a veteran quarterback. It wasn't like, Kyle Shanahan was pulling out bells and whistles like he did when he had to call plays for CJ Beathard and Nick Mullins and whatever slop he was handed his first couple of years in San Francisco. He looked like an NFL quarterback running an NFL offense. And I think if you're kind of going to evaluate every quarterback and their performance just from today, he'd be up near the top. I don't know if he'd be 1, 2, or 3, but I don't know how many guys had a better day than Brock Purdy or looked better, from whistle to whistle than he did on, Sunday against the Steelers.
You have any more praise to shower on our now future king, Brock Purdy, Curtis?
No, pretty impressive what he did today, considering he hadn't thrown the ball, what was it, past 10 yards in the preseason? like
that report,
I think that's what shocked us
right
all
before the game was wild. Like the report right before the game where they said like they didn't know how much velocity he had. Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah. Because we don't know if he can throw a fastball anymore, and he comes out and absolutely steams them in the first quarter. So I think that's what adds to the impressiveness of it, because we didn't really know if he was 100% healthy, if he had questions in his own mind, can I throw the ball down the field? And he just absolutely torched the Steelers.
But I was actually just reminded by again our wonderful producer Sean. He's gonna keep us on track here. on these Sunday shows. There's so much going on here as we're recording. He's doing a great job keeping us here on track. About Jacoby Myers, actually, and I'd forgotten about that. I was kind of getting ready for the podcast. I didn't see the hit, but I saw the aftermath. And Jacoby Myers, he's getting tested for a concussion. I mean, based on what I saw on the field, Tucker, did you see kind of what happened there? Or, I mean, he was out on the field. They had to come out and get him. It looked, he walked off on his own power, but I mean, it didn't look great for sure.
Yeah, it wasn't something where he walked back to the locker room. Like, you knew when it happened, and it was obvious. I think it was one of those injuries where they cut to commercial, so they can get him off the field and get things going. But yeah, that's something. I don't have their week 2 opponent in front of me, but I can't imagine he's going to be out there for week 2. It's probably something they're going to try to be very cautious with. I think the NFL, especially after everything that happened last year with Tua Tagovailoa and the other concussions, I think there's probably going to be a concerted effort after a big collision like that to keep him on the sidelines until he's 100% okay.
And he actually had a really, really big game ahead of that injury. Before that injury, had 9 catches for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, he had more targets than Davante Adams, which, I mean, if you're going to start to get concerned a little bit about Davante Adams coming out of that, I mean, Jacoby Myers has proven himself to be a target earner. He did in New England. Davante Adams is one of the best receivers in the league. I didn't expect to see this. I mean, of course, the Broncos have Patrick Surtain, and so maybe it's just a 1 week thing. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this offense goes. Do you have anybody just off the top of your head, if Jacoby Myers is going to be forced to miss time, and like Tucker said, it seems like that might be where we're headed. Do you like anybody in this passing game, or is it all Devontae and all Jacobs all the time?
No, I would assume Hunter Renfrow steps up. The McDaniels offenses usually do have a pretty consolidated target tree, so I'm assuming he would good 1 or 2 week start for most of those teams that are getting depleted. So I think he would catch 4 or 5 balls and give you a little bit of a floor in the next week, just assuming that Myers is going to miss some time.
Hunter Renfrow, I don't believe he was targeted today. We also didn't get a target from Michael Mayer, if I'm looking at this correctly. We did get 1 target to Austin Hooper. It literally was 19 targets. Jimmy Garoppolo threw the ball 26 times. 19 of those went to Jacoby Myers.
Like last year, it was Matt Collins would have the games with Davante Adams. So I would put Renfrow in, assuming he's going to play.
Yeah, it's like they're going to have a second one. I mean, maybe Devontae's just target Devontae 19 times and see what happens. Like you might as well do it, right? Let's move on to, is this the most shock? Was Bengals Browns, like, in a day of just like shocking performances coming after a Thursday where the Chiefs lost to the Lions? Obviously the Lions, we think there's a pretty good team. The Bengals going in, scoring 3 points, albeit in inclement weather, and just getting kind of destroyed by the Browns. Joe Burrow, like, they pulled Joe Burrow out of this game before the game was over. To me, it seemed like they were pulling him out even a little bit earlier than maybe you would expect them to. Is this the most shocking performance of the day, do you think, Tucker?
Yeah, I think so. And that was the game that I wasn't really going to keep my eye on that much. Like, I had NFL Red Zone on. I had Sunday Ticket on a couple other games in that early window. And I looked at the box score. I'm like, wait, that's odd. Joe Burrow's only thrown for like 30 yards in the first half. And man, they haven't really scored yet. And I think they kicked a field goal at the end of the first half to at least cut. I think it was like 10-3 at that point. But yeah, I mean, they didn't look like a team that a lot of people expect to be at the top or near the top of the AFC. Joe Burrow really struggled against Jim Schwartz. They struggled to get Jamar Chase involved. He only had like 5 catches for 39 yards, even though he was targeted 9 times. And T. Higgins, a guy who's looking for a big contract. I think that was kind of the biggest hole. I don't want to place the reason they lost on a wide receiver. I don't think a wide receiver ever holds that much blame unless they're maybe Kadarius Toney from Thursday night. But T. Higgins had 8 targets and 0 catches, right? Like they made a concerted effort to get him involved in the offense, and it just didn't happen. And credit to Jim Schwartz and that Cleveland Browns defense for holding them out and shutting them down. And basically at the end, Zach Taylor just pulled Joe Burrow I think is an act of mercy because he just didn't want him to go back out there and have to put up with whatever they were facing. But yeah, I think as we look forward to week 2, a team that I now have circled on my calendar is Cincinnati, because you imagine and you assume it's just a 1 week blip and they'll figure it out. And we've seen good teams that have bad opening weeks and just a bad game plan that they couldn't figure out. But I think of all the teams that struggled, they're the biggest eye opener by far.
I think it's important what you said, that we're going to look forward, because Burrow is now 1-3 in week 1 games. This is not the first time this has happened. He threw 4 interceptions in a loss week 1 of last season. And so this isn't the first time we've seen this. It is a bit surprising. And I don't have, again, we don't have the numbers coming right out of the game. It seemed to me from the eye test that the Cleveland Browns under Jim Schwartz really ramped up the amount of man coverage they were playing, which makes sense for them as a defense, because last year they were 4th in defensive success rate when playing man coverage, but they played man coverage at the 22nd highest rate. That's part of the reason probably that they have a new defensive coordinator. And so but Burrow's normally been pretty good at that. And the Bengals have the players to beat that coverage, and they just didn't in this game. Maybe the weather played some role. Maybe the fact that Burrow missed the entire preseason played some role. The Bengals, I still think, are very good. I think this is very interesting about the Browns, because I thought the Browns coming in had a very good roster, and I just didn't know about Watson. And I still kind of don't know. Like, they're coming off this giant win. I don't think Watson played particularly well in this game. He did get involved as a runner, but did you like what you saw from Watson today, or do you think that we still know anything about the Browns, Curtis?
I thought Watson looked very poor in the passing game, but then he used his legs a little bit more after the first quarter and got better. So if they can continue to use Chubb in the running game, and then Watson can feed off that too, I think they'll be fine, regardless of if he doesn't get better as a passer. Right? He's looked so bad now in his 7 games as it being back, but he has not looked good. I don't know if it's this different NFL that he's came back to, where they do play more zone and he's kind of a jailbreak quarterback. But once he did start moving his own feet, I thought he looked a little bit better, and the defense looked great. So they might have to just play a ball control game and win that way. But I don't have concerns with the offense, because I think they can still make it work. But I do have concerns about him through the air.
Yeah, and I think that the concerning part was that it was the same as last year, where he was just missing throws. You were saying, you're just like, I don't know how he's doing that, throwing it at his own feet. And obviously, I mean, they won, and he, like you said, had 5 for 45 for a touchdown and a touchdown on the ground. So he made it work. But 16 to 29, 154 yards, a touchdown and an interception. Just, it left a lot to be desired. But again, week 1 in bad weather, maybe he's going to get it turned around. And like you said, the rest of this offense, looks really, really good. Do you still have concerns here about Watson, Tucker? Were you able to watch much of this game?
Yeah, I thought he looked okay. I thought he looked fine. I mean, the offense didn't look great with him under center last year. You'd argue they were better and performed better with Jacoby Brissett. And it was, I think, a relatively easy situation that they were put in, given how great their defense was. But like Curtis said, I mean, Deshaun Watson's getting paid like a top 5 quarterback. I think the expectations in Cleveland is that he plays like a franchise guy. And right now, we haven't really seen that since he started playing there late last year. And maybe it is the weather today, and maybe he'll figure it out. And maybe as they move forward, he'll have something to build on. But he just kind of looks like a guy. And he looks like Baker Mayfield. He looks like, Jordan Love's still young, but he kind of is in that class for me right now. Like, I wouldn't put him in the top 5 or top 10 of quarterbacks. I don't know if he's really affecting the outcomes of games right now. He can win if everyone else steps up and does their job the way the defense did today. But like, I think if the defense gave up 21 points today, are they winning? I don't know if they are.
Yeah, that's a very good point about how the defense played really well, and they still only came out with 24 points. I will say, just to kind of add to this, this concern about Joe Burrow, that was actually written about by Warren Sharp, the guy who lends his name to this podcast, the Sharp Angles podcast. He wrote a betting preview this week about those Joe Burrow concerns coming out of week one and injured. So make sure you're going to Sharp Football Analysis and reading that. By the way, if you want all of Warren Sharp's betting recommendations, if you want all of Rich Rebar's fantasy previews, the worksheet every week, if you want Curtis's waiver recommendations every single Tuesday, make sure you go to Sharp Football Analysis and subscribe to the All Access package. Go and check that out. It has really everything you need. There's DFS stuff in there from Rich. He wrote 3 DFS articles this week. He has his rankings, his worksheet. We have Curtis's waiver wire. We have betting recommendations for college football, for the NFL. Everything you want is in there over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. So make sure you go and check that out. All right, I want to move on to a game that was finishing as we started recording, and that was the Chargers versus the Dolphins. This was actually a game that Rich and I talked about on the podcast last Thursday as being one that we're very interested to see how it plays out. And it lived up to the expectations. It was a great game, went down to the wire, ton of points. Both teams were able to move the football. The Chargers, in a surprising way, were able to move the football. It was just a really, really fun game. Did you get to watch much of this one, Tucker?
I did have it on one of my secondary TVs because I had the Eagles game on, and I felt bad. I wanted to watch it because it looked more fun. It was like a couple weeks ago. I went to Temple and I was watching Temple Akron in college football, and everyone's tweeting about how amazing the Colorado TCU game is, and I felt left out. I kind of felt that way today, not really getting to keep both eyes on that game, but it lived up to the billing. I mean, these are two teams with their offenses, with their quarterbacks. They really, I think, get a lot of people excited. They're kind of two of the dark horse candidates to win the AFC, and they both lived up to it. I mean, Tua Tagovailoa threw for 450 yards. Feel bad for anyone who had to play Tyreek Hill in fantasy this week. He had 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Justin Herbert in that Chargers offense kind of matched them step for step throughout the game. It was on a week where there was a lot of sloppy football and not a lot of great offensive football. I think Dolphins Chargers was probably the best matchup of the week by far.
You mentioned how much Tua threw for. That was actually one of the things we talked about. Is this was one of the games last year before the injuries. This was one of the games last year where he struggled. It came right after the 49ers game as well. They were both on the West Coast, and they struggled against this defense, and they really couldn't throw over the middle of the field. They couldn't throw down the field, and we did not see that at all today. We saw Tyreek Hill be able to get whatever he wanted down the field. Like you mentioned, Tyreek Hill had 215 yards and 2 touchdowns on 11 catches. He was running wild down the field. And I've had concerns about this offense because we didn't really see them do it against great defenses last year. I'm not obviously sure the Chargers have a great defense. In fact, I kind of doubt that they do. But this was a defense they struggled with last year. They come out in week 1. They absolutely destroy it. They were cooking from the first drive. And the offense looked like it did when we were great last year. I kind of faded to this offseason in my drafts. And I feel like, Curtis, I'm going to end up regretting.
Yeah, no kidding. I've got some quick stats here for you guys. Tua averaged 11.4 yards ADOT per target compared to Justin Herbert's 7.5. So Kellen Moore, throw it deeper, like you said you were going to.
7.5 is way better than where we were last year.
I don't know if it is. And the Chargers actually ran the ball 44 times and 36 times. They were actually quite run heavy, way more run heavy than I thought they would be. And yeah, the Dolphins, I thought they might try to run the ball a little more in this game, and they just came out and passed it. And they had some great plays, and the explosives were incredible. So good on Mike McDaniel. Like I said earlier, Shanahan and him have definitely figured out the offenses in this league, and that was such a cool game to watch because we were concerned what they were going to come up with in this game, I think.
And it's, I'm glad you mentioned the running game because that's what stood out to me as well. And the runs pass split at the end of this game does not really tell the story because I'm looking at their stats now, and their running stats look exactly the same as what they looked like before we started recording, and the game wasn't over at that point. And so obviously they were throwing it at the end, the Chargers were trying to catch up. They lost, by the way, 36-34. I didn't say that at the beginning. Probably should. And so this is, the run split was even more pronounced, and it was successful. And that's another thing that was, interesting to see. Their offensive line is healthy right now. They were able to run the football against a Miami defense that was actually good against the run last year and brought everybody back along that defensive line. And so to be able to run for 234 yards, 3 touchdowns, Eckler had 7.3 yards per carry. Kelly had 5.7 yards per carry. Herbert got himself a rushing touchdown as well. That's all positive. You say, well, it's still not great, the ADOT. I mean, what was the ADOT last year? Wasn't it? It was 6.3, something like that for Justin Herbert. That's a yard, 1.2 yards or so above that. So we're gonna call that a win. Does that still happen if we don't have Mike Williams out for some of the game? Mike Williams did come back, I'm pretty sure, right, Tucker? Mike Williams did come back to that game.
Yeah, he came back and finished the game.
Yeah, so they were missing him for a little bit. So it is going to be interesting to see how that plays. My question is kind of moving forward with this. Was that running a function of this is how they thought they should attack the Dolphins defense, which, we do have a new defensive coordinator in Fangio. Maybe that's what they wanted to do against that defense. And maybe that's why we saw this. But if this is just what Kellen Moore wants to do, and what we saw, in Dallas in recent season, that was just Kellen Moore being Kellen Moore, and we put too much of that blame on Mike McCarthy. I mean, if Joshua Kelly's out there in your leagues, especially in deeper leagues, you got to go get him, right, Curtis?
Yeah, I can't believe how many he had. 16 carries or something like that today. I don't have that number
16
right. 16
for 91 and a touchdown.
Yeah, and both he and Eckler could have been used today, which is pretty incredible. But just two big plays, he's going to keep everything in front of him. So let's wait and see what happens when they play some of the teams in their own it up a little bit more. So let's not overreact to this one. If Joshua Kelly's out there, go get him, but maybe don't start him. Have him hold a bit.
I think that's the key. We need to see. This is just the key of everything, right, Tucker? For week one, it's like we're trying to take these big ideas out of week one, and the answer is, well, I guess we'll see, right?
Right, and that's kind of the death of sports talk, right? If you say we'll see, that's pointless, right? You can shut it down and go home, and there's no point in watching this. But it is tough because as someone who, if your running backs struggled the way mine did this week, and as someone who had like Antonio Gibson, and clearly he's never going to get the ball again after that first half fumble against the Cardinals, you kind of look around and do you take a shot on someone like Justice Hill, or are the Ravens going to go out and add a big name free agent the way they have in the past, right? Think about what they've done when the running back room has been decimated by injury in the past. They brought back Le'Veon Bell at one point to try and shore up that rushing attack. I'm sure a lot of people remember the Le'Veon Bell Ravens era, but do you go with that? Do you go after someone like Joshua Kelly? Do you think someone like Kenny Gainwell, who I think a lot of people thought was probably third on the Eagles depth chart, had like 15 touches in the first half of that game against the Patriots today?
He is really the starter. Yeah, like he is the starter at this point in Philadelphia. Like I don't think we really believed it, but there's no doubt about it.
Get this out there that he is the third best back on that team. Like, DeAndre Swift is a good running back, and Penny is elite when he's healthy. He is the third best back on that team.
Yeah, I don't really know what they're doing. I have no idea what's going on. But to your point, Tucker, if Kenny Gainwell wasn't drafted, and he's drafted in a lot of leagues, especially the more serious leagues. But I have a 14-team league with very shallow benches where Kenneth Gainwell was dropped, and I picked him up immediately. And so there are going to be leagues where he's out there, and you're right, he's just the starting running back. Will that be the case next week? Again, I'm going to make you mad here, Tucker. We'll see. I don't.
Yeah, I get it because I'm right there with you because I think there are probably a lot of people who, if you lost your week one matchup and you need help, it kind of happens every year where someone explodes week one and you think that's going to be the guy, and you waste all your waiver funds or your spot on the waiver wire to pick up this guy. And it really was just a 1 week wonder. And he goes back to being what we thought he was going to be, in the preseason before week one, because, maybe it was just a matchup advantage that coaching staff thought. And I think it's really tough for a league where right now I think it's pretty thin at running back and got even thinner with some of the injuries we saw today, who knows, kind of where everything is going to lead for a lot of these teams. Like, can you count on Joshua? Like, I know Joshua Kelly's probably out there in like 90% of leagues right now, but is he going to go out there and get 16 touches every game? Probably not, but I'm sure there are going to be quite a few people in almost every league who think he will be, and will try to jump on him immediately when the waiver wire opens on Tuesday.
Absolutely, because you have to take chances. And by the way, this is just kind of a strategy thing. Spend your money early, save some, obviously, but getting a running back that is going to be able to start for you for several weeks in week 1 is more valuable than in week 13, just because you have a longer time period for that player to start for you. So I'm always very aggressive in the waiver wire in week 1, and sometimes it burns you. Like, it's going to burn you, but if you hit, it's going to be very good for you. I have a note here in the rundown that is just Arthur Smith hates fantasy football. What is that, Curtis? What do you mean?
Yeah, take it with the Falcons. They won today. Of course, they always win, and they had Tyler Algier led them in touches. They have 3 players they drafted in the top 10 that he out-touched today. Pitts and London combined for 4 targets, and I know that'll be like the main thing on X, that is how they didn't touch the ball. And Art Smith doesn't care. He won the game handily. And they are going to be a team that wins a lot of games this year, where I think we're a pro Falcons podcast. And
Falcons are the team of sharp football analysis. Rich was the only one that wasn't in. And then he drafted the Falcons in our win total draft that he and I did with Lauren. So the Falcons are now officially the team of sharp football
we are
analysis.
Tony Pollard Falcons. Sharp football is our 2 guys this year. But they're going to win games, but you can't trust any of their players other than the running backs, it's crazy, because he devised the game plan. They won. Ritter got sacked a bunch of times. It looked like he struggled a little bit. When he actually threw the ball, he was good. But yet again, they've got these studs out there that he hasn't had to utilize. So it's kind of crazy. What is the ceiling when he does utilize Drake London and Kyle Pitts, when they do start hitting some explosives with those guys? So I think that's an offense that, like, look out. I think there's a ceiling there that we haven't seen yet. But again, 1 target for Drake London today. What are we doing?
Well, I have to give Curtis more props here, because I'm looking at this Rams. So the way that the multi-view worked on YouTube with the new the new Sunday ticket is the one game that wasn't on my multi-view was the Rams and the Seahawks. I didn't watch it to the I'll watch it a little bit later. I roll into the box score, and Puka had 15 targets, and you had him in your waiver column. Kyron Williams had 15 carries and 2 touchdowns. You had him in your waiver column this past week. I mean, Tutu Atwell had 119 yards, right? What are the Rams? Who needs Cooper Kupp, right? Like, just pick up all these guys, you're gonna be fine, huh?
That's kind of what he's hurting Cooper Kupp's trade value. Don't let Puka have any more games like this. But yeah, that's going to be the big waiver ad. I'm excited to see how this week goes. But if he's available, people are going to be excited about that. He was leading the league in targets, so I'm not sure if Tyreek Hill got ahead of him there at the end. But the most targets in week 1, Puka Nacua. Crazy.
Nacua. I'm going to get it right. We're going to move forward with me getting Nacua right. It is, that could be a good, we're talking about, we don't know what these running backs are. And I mean, if Kenneth Gainwell's available in your league, you're going to pick up Kenneth Gainwell at this point. But if you don't really need a running back, the fact that we had these injuries, the fact that there are going to be some running backs out there, the fact that people will be taking some speculative bids on the veteran running backs if we don't get news on that before waivers run on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, you might get a little bit of a discount here on Puka. And this seems like the situation. We have no idea when Cooper Kupp is coming back. We have no idea what his injury is. All we know is he's on injured reserve. That's it. He has to be out until week 5. We have no idea if he actually will come back in week 5. We don't know about this situation. If Puka's just going to come out here and get, 10 to 15 targets a game, and you're able to get him at even, what are you thinking, like 30%? Like, how high are we going?
Yeah, good question. I'm going to have some time to digest this, take a little bit of look at that game, because That's staggering numbers for his first game. What was he, a late round draft pick, and he just comes out and blitzes for 15 targets in his first game, 100 yards. Pretty crazy.
And you also have to say it is always fun when a player that the fantasy community has been talking about literally the entire offseason, when they come out and hit in week one, it's always fun.
These guys
because
never
it's fun
hit.
for
Dude, that's
on
the thing. These guys never ever
they
hit.
never hit. That's the fun. Yeah. And so the victory lapping on, I'm still going to call it Twitter. I heard you call it X. I'm still going to call it Twitter. The victory lapping on Twitter was fun because everybody had the same thought. All right, we've been here 50 minutes already. We're going to start getting out of here. Before we do though, I want to look forward to week 2, and I want to think about, what are we paying attention to in week 2? What are we thinking about? What's a storyline we're going to be looking at? And so what are we watching? What are we watching for week 2, Tucker?
My big thing is I want to watch these teams that struggled and see what's real and what's not. Because I think we came into the season and you could probably say there were about like maybe 7 or 8 teams who were true bona fide Super Bowl contenders. And outside of San Francisco, I don't know if any of them played really well. San Diego, had a tough game against Miami, but like the Eagles struggled against New England and barely came out on top. You look through the rest of it. Cincinnati obviously struggled. Kansas City struggled against Detroit. You still have Buffalo and Dallas yet to play, and you can throw the Jets in there too. But there are a lot of teams that came in with sky-high expectations who misstepped in week 1, and maybe it is a blip. We talked about that with Cincinnati. They've struggled in week 1 before, but who is it a blip and who is it a trend? Like, I think that's the big takeaway when I look at week 2. Like, week 1, you get fluky results. It happens. Different things can make for a weird game sometimes. In week 1, you can catch a team off guard after like 6 months of preparation. But if you lose week 2, if Cincinnati comes out in week 2 and struggles just as much, that's when I start raising the alarm and the red flag and worry about that. So these teams that came in, hoping to hoist the Lombardi trophy in February, that lost week 1, that are off to an 0-1 start, it's easy to come back if you're 1-1, but digging yourself into an 0-2 start is really tough to get out of. And if I'm the Chiefs and I'm the Bengals, I'm worried about what's going to happen next week. And you don't want to throw out must win in week 2, but I need to see improvement from both of them because those are 2 teams I think a lot of guys are tied to moving forward, whether it's on the futures market or fantasy or whatever it may be. Neither one really stepped up or lived up to the hype in week 1.
The Bengals have the Ravens next week at home, I believe. And then the Chiefs have the Jaguars on the road. And so it's not like you're walking into easy matchups. Although what we saw from the Jaguars today against what I still think is probably not a great Colts team, maybe that's not going to be as tough a challenge for the Chiefs. Mine rolls right into what you're talking about is when we're thinking about these games, are we overreacting? Are we just reacting appropriately to what happened? And it's hard to know, but I always want to bring up last week 1. All right. Last week 1. Here's some results from week 1 of last season. The 49ers lost to the Bears, albeit in a tsunami, essentially, right? Not a tsunami, a monsoon. Like it was very wet there, but they lost. The 49ers lost to the Bears. The Bengals lost to the Steelers. The Jaguars lost to the Commanders. Dallas scored 3 points against the Bucks and lost against the Bucks. So like you look at kind of all that and you say, all right, maybe week 1 isn't the end all be all. And we'll see where we are here in a little bit. What about you, Curtis? What are you looking for?
I'm excited about Ridley against. I don't push back as I would like today. Like they pushed them a little bit, but I'm looking forward to seeing that game. I still think some of these quarterbacks have better in them. Lamar, Trevor Lawrence, Mahomes, they all finished with negative EPA per play. So I'm looking forward to these good offenses getting back on track. They had a full off season to prepare for this one opponent and they struggled. So I'm looking forward to them turning it around and seeing some big high scoring games next week.
This is for most of these with the track record, we're just going to assume it's a blip, but I mean, you kind of would assume the same thing about Russ last year too. And that didn't go well, but that's it for us. We're going to get out of here. We're going to check out the Sunday night football game. Thank you for listening. If you listen live, thank you for downloading. Download the podcast. Remember, if you downloaded the podcast, we do this live every Sunday on YouTube. at 7:30. So make sure you go to YouTube, search for Warren Sharp, and you'll find our channel there. Subscribe, and you'll get notifications. We'll be back next week to do this again. Thanks, Tucker. Thanks, Curtis, and we'll talk to you all then.